I'm Marilyn, CEO and founder of Cosmic Centaurs.
And I'm Tala. Odeh. I'm a senior consultant here at Cosmic Centaurs.
And for those of you joining us for the first time, Cosmic Centaurs is an organizational and leadership development firm.
Marilyn and I and the wider team have been putting on the Cosmic Conference for 6 years now. It started out as one of those very classic on the dining room table ideas that has then turned into a space where we learn out loud and share what we learn with the leaders in the world that we work with. So each year we choose a theme, and it reflects the question that leaders are wrestling with most.
Yes, and over the years, we've done quite a few themes, actually. We started off with the future of work, hybrid leadership. We then covered rethinking the employee experience, strategy execution. Last year, we ventured into the leadership development space, and we started talking about polarities. But this year, one theme kept coming up in every conversation we had with leaders, and that was the topic of systems. Many leaders told us they felt stuck in firefighting mode, solving problems that kept coming back. And what we realized is what they were faced with wasn't a failure of leadership or strategy, but of the systems that they rely on. And that's why this year's theme is the system is the strategy, helping leaders shift from firefighting to future building.
It's been amazing, actually. And it's been 7 weeks. Yes, you heard that. It's a 7-week conference. And we've been exploring what it means to think in systems, from the very foundational tools and the methods that call it intro to systems thinking, to practical real world examples from the leaders who've built amazing systems that scale, systems that innovate, and all the way to the human and spiritual dimension of it all. And that's the part of the conversation that brings heart into the topic of systems thinking.
And not far from heart, today we're here to talk about culture. And we really wanted to sit down and challenge the way in which most people think about organizational culture. You know, we often tend to hear that culture is the soft, fluffy stuff. But in truth, culture couldn't be further from that. Culture is really the way in which organizations deliver value. And too often, it is treated as a HR marketing comms project, right? We come up with our values, we stick them on a wall, we do some team building, we come up with slogans. But if we've learned anything, and certainly a lot of the academic frameworks that we rely on have taught us anything, like Edgar Sheen's, is that the visible artifacts, like those kind of outwardly visible artifacts that sound like culture, are actually just the tip of the iceberg. What really defines culture are invisible systems. And in fact, culture is the way we work. Culture is how we make decisions. It's how we run meetings. It's how information travels in a company. It's how we design our processes. It's how we recognize people, and not at all what we say our values are.
Yeah, 100%. Actually, we really believe that, to the extent that when people approach us to do any culture missions, we're like, we are not doing this if all you're going to do is put the values on the wall, because that is not what we mean. We don't want an internal comms campaign and to label that as culture. We really mean, like Marilyn said, the way that we work, everything from the structure to the processes, the routine tasks that kind of keep the engine moving day to day. And definitely moments where peaks and culture are celebrated, for sure. But it's very much across the organizational experience. Every touch point, from even before getting hired all the way to offboarding, is where culture lives. And so that's what we'll explore today.
Yeah, and because we like to experiment and play, and this is our first webinar being just, two centaurs other than the moms webinar, we wanted to do something a little bit different. We're going to play something that internally as an organization, we call the omnichannel bingo. And so the Omnichannel Bingo is based on our own framework, the Omnichannel Organization. And that framework has been with us since we started the company, because we wanted to have a way in which we can look at an organization as a living system. And there was no better time to talk about our own framework than in a conference about systems, because we really see and know and have designed this Omnichannel Organization framework to act almost like the map of the system. As Tala was saying, no touch point is left unturned, no stone is left unturned when we think about how to optimize organizations, how to build them so that the people in them can both deliver and thrive. And we've been using this framework for 6 years, both for running assessments and then for running interventions on the organization. This framework, as all of our work, is based on lots of academic references in depth. The two most notorious would be Prof. Jose Santos, who's actually going to be our guest speaker tomorrow to close the conference. He has a framework called the EOS that I studied with him 10 years ago. And of course, McKinsey's original academic paper 7S, not the version that they have today. Our framework really tries to map the organization and make sure that we don't forget any aspect of how the organization, its strategy, and its environment interact with each other. We look at alignment to strategy, structure, process, controls, people, and culture, as well as the environment in which we operate and with which we interact. The way we are going to play this game, it's kind of like it's a hybrid Jeopardy moment over here. As we said earlier, culture really isn't about culture. So what you see in our culture column, that's really only the visible side of culture. Actually, culture is about all the other things. And culture exists whether you manage it or not. So what we want to be talking about is how, in fact, do we align all the other things on this map in order to reinforce the culture that we believe is going to help us deliver on our strategy. And we're going to do it by unpacking one column or one little box at a time. We're going to do this for as long as we have. So we'll try to see how many questions we can cover in the next 50 minutes. We do want our audience to take part in this. So if there are any specific components of the Omnichannel org that you are interested in having us explore, and you want to make sure that we do cover it in the 50 minutes that we have, put them in the chat. Tala's going to start me off with her own question, and we'll take turns answering questions. But if you want us to cover any specific topic and how it connects to culture, that's what we're here for today. So Tala, over to you and over to the audience to share with us their preferences.
Wonderful. Thanks. Yeah, actually, maybe a note to the audience, despite Marilyn and I being incredibly competitive individuals, this is not necessarily a game where we're keeping score. So as you do kind of select a column or a little tile on the Omnichannel org, we will highlight it in gray so that you know that we've covered it. But I'm going to start us off with what, as you can see, is at the top of our framework here, this piece on alignment strategy. And I want to start with you, Marilyn, because I think that I love your perspective on this. We always say strategy is what you deliver and culture is how you create that value. So maybe just a note to kind of kick us off here. How do you see strategy impact culture? Mutually interdependent? Like, give us your perspective on that.
Yes, I mean, I love this question because I think that there's this preferred view of the world where we think of strategy and culture in opposition to each other. And I think it's because of this quote that's attributed to Peter Drucker, although slightly taken out of context, that says that culture eats strategy for lunch, where culture is seen as an obstacle to strategy execution. But on the other hand, same Peter Drucker said, if you can manage the culture, then you can manage the future, where culture is seen as supportive of the strategy. And the truth is, like any good system, the idea is that all of these things are interconnected and they interact with each other.
Yeah.
The end goal is to deliver the outcome of the system, which is its purpose, its outcome, its strategic goal, whatever you want to call it, its BHAG, call it what you will. But to think of these things as anything but like two parts that are interacting within the system, that's why the Omnichannel org is designed the way that it is. And if they have a positive feedback loop, meaning if strategy and culture reinforce each other, then the system can deliver its outcome better, faster, stronger, or whatever your favorite lyric from that Daft Punk song is. And if they don't, if they actually have a negative loop, which means that one destroys the other, whichever way, then the outcome will be diminished. So that's kind of my conceptual thinking around this. There's a billion data points that show that when culture and strategy are aligned, we have greater enterprise value growth, more profit. And that's not to say that money is the only outcome, but money is the most, unequivocal outcome that we can all agree is the positive one in the context of for-profit organizations, right? And so there is no debate that our job as leaders, and I'll go back to a quote from Joe Santos that I shared in our offsite last Friday, which is the role of a leader is not to manage the work, but the performance of an organization. And so all of the elements of the omnichannel, including the culture and the strategy piece, need to have that kind of positive reinforcing loop if we want to claim that we're doing our job as leaders. So that is my perspective.
Nice. And I really want you to tell everybody about a mission that we've done with a scale up based here in the region around culture and strategy, where actually
Yeah.
they reached out to us for a culture mission. And you went back and you were like, actually, interesting. Yeah,
Actually,
we're not going to start there. So maybe you want to tell us a little bit about that story, because I know that that conversation kind of took them aback, but ultimately ended up in a really positive set of outcomes.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, so this was a leader that I really love and respect. They were starting so a year into their next big thing. They'd already built an incredibly successful organization in the past, and they reached out and they're like, "We need to work on culture." I was like, "You guys are barely a year old." I mean, not to say that I disagree. You and I wrote our purpose and values down when there was just the two of us. I'm not
Yep.
saying that there's any time that's too soon to do it, but it was just unusual. So I said, why? And they said, look, last time I didn't care for my culture in the way that I should have in my previous company, and we became too big and it was too hard to change. So this time I
Yeah.
want to get it right. So I was like, love that. I'm in. But when we do any kind of mission, whether people bring us in to redesign their structure, well, or they bring us in to redesign their culture, or whatever it is that the stated mission is, we never just rely on what leaders can see. We do a full system scan using our omnichannel org. And what we discovered was that actually, in addition to people not really being aligned on how they experience, perceive culture, and whether or not they experience it in a positive way, they also didn't know what the strategy was or how they contributed to it. And so we had a fundamental discussion with the leaders of that organization. And honestly, there's two ways to look at this. One is closer to kind of Maslow's pyramid approach, which, if you retrofit that into the world of work, the survival and security and belonging piece is a little bit of like, my job is stable. I know what I'm here to do. I have some predictability. There is a bit of routine. I'm clear on how I contribute. We have common goals. People like me as a team member. So if you go from the bottom of the pyramid up, culture kind of comes a little bit above those, lowest needs. So one question is, do you start with culture? Because clearly there are other more simple, more basic needs that aren't met. And on the other hand, if you look at the hierarchy of strategy statements based on the work of Jim Collins, then you'd say the opposite. You'd say, actually, purpose and values is the most permanent of the strategy statements. Then you can surround it with the BHAG, the vision, the mission, the goals, the strategy, the KPIs. And so, what if we start at the core of that nucleus and expand out? And our view is really that we should start with strategy. And that's what we did. So what started off as a culture mission turned into a strategic alignment mission. As is quite common, the strategy seemed clear to the people at the top, but wasn't communicated or cascaded or clarified for everybody else. So we ended up starting there, and we spent a whole 4 months on that before we came back and said, all right, now let's go back into the artifacts of culture, the purpose, the vision, the values, etc., and work on those. And I think if we'd done it the other way around, people will not have been receptive. What's the point of talking about culture if you're not clear on strategy? And I'll also say, to kind of close this off, is that I also believe that culture is one of the tools, right, that leaders has to deliver on strategy. But if we don't know where we're going, then what's the point of having culture? It doesn't mean we have to know with any high degree of certainty, but it just means there has to be a sense of direction before we just simply start talking about values.
Thanks for sharing that story. I always love when we tell it, because I think it always reminds us, the team, that we work with, that we'll always start with our first principle of like, what is it that the organization needs? And the omnichannel org is that, right? It's a systemic assessment. So it actually tells us a lot more than what we're initially brought in to do. So on a mission like culture, sometimes it's the reverse, right? Sometimes they'll tell us, we need help with our structure. And we're like, actually, let's just take a minute, take a step back. I'm going to bring us back to this framework just to kind of give our audience a moment to remember what it looks like, and to say that alignment to strategy really does cut across. And that's why we look at it in that way. That's why it's so important for us to come back and assess, to say, do we know where we're headed? As you said, Marilyn, no matter how we get there, is it clear to us what the destination of this ship is? And so really enjoy providing clarity around that, and love for the audience to come in and tell us a little bit more about which area of the omnichannel org they want us to jump in on. We have two questions
Yeah,
here.
we actually do have a question from
Great.
Hadil. Maybe you want to take that one, which
Sure.
is now about structure, the first column in our model.
Our first
Can you
column.
talk about how culture can impact organizational structure?
Yes. How culture can impact organizational structure. Actually, in so many ways. I think so often consultants are known for coming in and doing a reorg. They restructure a company. And actually, when it comes to culture, that has some, honestly, typically quite strong impacts on the way in which people come in and operate. Like you're changing a lot. You're changing a lot of people's sense of clarity on their role, of how they create value. And there are some organizational structures that can impact culture in positive ways and in negative ways. So maybe let's talk about kind of the fundamentals of an org structure. Org structures help us design not just who sits where, but how the work is created. How do we take our organization and segment the way in which we create value? How do we group people? So you have typical models, right? You have a matrix structure. You have different silos, of course, where you just group people by product or by function, and you have different layers of the org chart. Well, if you're a very layer heavy org chart, then that tells you that maybe the way in which that you work requires a lot of approvals, and that can tell you something about the culture, to say that actually you wouldn't necessarily walk up to any leader and ask them for something. You might need permission to do that, right? These are cultures that they tend to, by design, be a little bit more risk averse. They have a lot of protocol to follow, versus you have flatter quote unquote structures, like you see at organizations in the tech world. For example, Google is notoriously known, uh, and even different organizations. I know TikTok is also similar. ByteDance, you can just walk up to a leader and ask them for something. You don't need to do that. That creates an invitation, a culture where you can ask more questions there. You don't have to be too weary of who you approach in those ways, and that tells you something about the way that the work is done. You also have organizations where that are very siloed, and we've seen this a lot in our work, right? Where one group works and they work to really protect something, and they want to make sure that it's all there. Versus some cultures are a little bit more open-minded, and you can just kind of cross-functionally collaborate a lot better. I'm going to give a specific example of one very popular one. We did a case study on this at our offsite, and that was the Microsoft organization pre-Satya Nadella. So you're talking 2000s to mid 2010s.
Mhm.
Microsoft was known to have very siloed structure, where your organization and your product teams were very focused on what they were working on. And that created a culture of defense. Actually, people were not discovering, they weren't collaboratively innovating. They were very much protecting what they were innovating in their own little in their teams. And so what that tells us is sometimes, actually, if by design you're not linking people from different parts of the organization, then by design you're creating something about the culture that tells you actually maybe you're not designed to cross-functionally collaborate. And structure, I'll just say one last thing, isn't just the report. It's not just the way the org chart is designed. There's many elements to it. How do you link different teams? Do you have task forces? Do you have different dotted reporting lines? How do you actually share information across this structure? All of these things really matter. It's not simply just, oh, this is where everybody is on a chart designed on an Excel sheet or something. So I'll start there. Maybe Marilyn want to ask, is there something you want to add, or do you have a follow-up question to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just kind of add to what you're saying. I think that org structures are a really great way to understand some cultural dimensions of an organization. So, when we do these missions, we always ask to see an org structure. It allows us to understand. I mean, someone might say, oh, yeah, no, we play it really cool here. Everybody can come up to me, everybody can talk to me. But then the org structure shows extreme levels of hierarchy. So a really tall structure as opposed to flat, what you were talking about. That's an easy tell. Centralization versus decentralization. Again, how much autonomy? Is the org structure accompanied with delegation of authority? I mean, these sounds like really boring things to be talking about, but that tells you how centralized, decentralized, hierarchical or not, formalized or not, these teams are. Are we looking at team-based organizations where we're really kind of focusing on the outcome and then structuring around it? Are we more towards functional or product-based organizations? And by the way, I want to say that there are no perfect org structures. Actually, one of the one of the professors who contributed to something called, I think it's called contingency theory, passed away this week in Harvard. And
Oh,
contingency theory in org structure design is this idea that there is no better choice. There is no organizational design that is perfect. It's actually about choosing the right size. There is no size fits all. It's not to say that loose, innovative, flexible cultures are better. They're not. I don't want a loose, innovative, flexible culture in the cockpit of a plane, for
absolutely.
example.
Definitely not. Or an operating room where people are experimenting.
I'd rather they know how to experiment. So
Yeah,
that's what I always say. Similarly to culture, the right structure reinforces strategy or gets in the way of it. And so all of these distinctions that you've made, I think, are really relevant. And so again, structure is a manifestation of culture. And obviously, when we see that there's a leader that's trying to push towards a culture, but the structure is going to get in the way, once more, we look at this systematically or systemically, and we try to make sure that the tension between those two things are resolved. I think, Tala, I'd love for us to talk about another form of structure, which is the workplace, the
absolutely.
actual physical workplace, and maybe share a bit more about how that structure also influences culture.
Absolutely. And to answer that question, I'm actually going to talk about a project that we worked on a few years back with a creative communications agency based out of the region. We were lucky enough to be brought in to come and work on what was a workspace redesign. They were designing their new offices, and they were like, "We want to make sure that we get it right." Now, if you've ever heard, some of us come from marketing or agency backgrounds where typically culture is like, we have bean bags and we have a foosball table and we have all these things in our workspace that make our culture cool. But in a lot of these organizations, and it also means that it doesn't mean what you think it does, right? It just kind of comes off as like, oh, we have this thing, like, please stay working 24 hours a day now that you have a but that's not the case. So, what was really amazing about the mission that we were brought in to do was to design an organizational like experience almost in the workplace. And so we went and we studied them. And the team will drop a link to an HBR article that came out about how we structured this research. But one of the most interesting revelations that came out of that was we went to their offices and we observed how teams were working together. How often did people, walk up to someone and ask them questions? Where were they convening? What was the room that was intended to be for ideation? How big was your meeting space? And did you have a 30-foot conference table that had 2 meters of space between you and the other side? And were you really conducting hiring interviews in there? All of these small things gave us insight as to the type of culture that this organization wanted to have. And this space actually had some really amazing pockets where teams were coming together to work together. And what they needed was a lot more collaboration in their space. And so they didn't have a lot of those bean bags, didn't have a lot of those things. But one thing that did come up through the research was they had a lot of working parents. Specifically in this industry and communication, there was a lot of women. And so in the workspace design, we said, great, if you want an inclusive workplace, and if your culture is that, you need a room where working parents can especially working moms, can pump. You need a room where they can go and they can manage all of that. And so these are just some of the small examples that came out in that research. And we always like to say, like, what does your workspace say about you? Are you a tech scale up that wants to poach talent from all the best organizations? Great. Does your workplace invite them? Or does it feel very corporate? Like small questions you can ask yourself about the workspace design. We are centaurs, so we are a bit biased. We are like, bring in plants, remove LED lights,
Yeah,
try natural sunlight. But these are just small things that also create space for an environment where you are ready to learn, where you're willing to create your best work, where you want to spend time in that, doesn't make you feel like you want to escape from the workplace. That's also part of it.
I
These
also,
are just things. Yeah, please
yeah,
go ahead.
to that, I think that what was also the strength of this leadership team that brought us in is they also came in not just with wanting to take work towards a place of higher well-being, but also wanting to start by designing the work before they design the office.
That was
And
very nice.
so what you were talking about in terms of the collaboration piece, again, if you want to promote certain behaviors, then the space that people operate and exist in is an extremely strong nudge.
Yep.
You can't collaborate with others if there's no space to do that. You might, again, express hierarchy one way or another, depending on who gets the offices that are by the window versus not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we think that these aren't important, but actually, humans understand the world through the space. I mean, me being an architect, obviously, I'm very sensitive to these things. Human beings understand the world through the space that they're in. And so, all of these signs that were being sent by the old office, those were things that this leadership team wanted to explicitly get rid of. They wanted to explicitly focus on spaces that not just allowed for personal, individual concentration, but
Yep.
collective ideation, because in their industry, it is through the collective brain power of their team members that they can create, the next best campaign, recommendation, event, whatever it was. And
Yeah.
because they understood that the value of their business came from that, they wanted to update their office space to reflect it. They wanted to also reflect, for example, their focus on their customer relationship. So, about a third of that office became a semi public space where clients could come, engage, be in town halls and big presentations, have dialogue. I attended one such roundtable in their office. Like, they really wanted to create that space for collaboration, not just within, but with their environment, if we look back at our omnichannel org. So I think the beauty of that is not to think of the workspace just as the place we go to work, but as another tool in your toolbox to promote certain behaviors and to align them with what creates value in your industry.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And actually, I think it's a really nice way to also then say, like, to look at the workforce population that you have and the work model that you have. And so Matt asks, how is culture built, enhance, or change with remote workers? And actually, that was a really important piece of that whole engagement, whereas to say that a lot of organizations will implement like a hot desk system, like come in and grab a desk. But actually, sometimes there is a little bit of value in having structured places where you can come in and create work. And some of the pieces that we heard from some of the team members was like, no, no, this was right after the pandemic. They were like, I need to come into the workplace. I need a space to focus. I need us to really think meaningfully about when I need to be in the workplace, because actually not everybody is able to create meaningful value distributed. And so we consider that, and we thought about, well, are some of those desk seats going to be a little bit more permanent? Whereas employees who literally like didn't have another space to work, could they come in and really make sure that they were there 9 to 5, Monday through Friday? Versus some of the more employees who were happy to work a bit more flexibly, or had also the type of work that allowed them to do so, had more flexible seating. So we really did look at the workforce population and their work model to say, how can we make sure that we design a space for that? So it really wasn't important. And to build on that is also to say that it wasn't just about the workplace. The culture had to also live on even in a distributed work environment. And so we were then, working with those leaders to say, well, how are you going to make sure that no matter where you are, you feel like you are part of this organization, you feel what the culture of the organization is. And that sparked some interesting conversations. I know, Marilyn, you want to jump in and add to this.
Yeah, I mean, I think this brings us to something that Joe Santos always said, is that you can create structure in space or in place and in time. And so
Yes.
I think that to Matt's question, the workplace is a place. And so there we can put out the signs and create the spaces that will enable certain behaviors and also the propagation of the culture that we want. When it comes to remote workers, because we don't have a shared place, we only have a shared time, as in the calendar. The calendar becomes your place of structure. And we can think about this till the cows come home. There, I have not found, and by the way, we run and have always run a fully remote team.
Yep.
Some of us co-locate sometimes, but we're remote to each other. And the only way that I can tell you that culture lives is through time, meaning rituals. The cadences that we do this through our stand ups, our retrospectives, our celebrations, our birthday parties, our socializing time. And yes, we do that even online. And so we should probably add that, like workplace or work time in our
Yeah.
model,
Love that.
because both of those things matter. And yes, of course, when people are remote, you have to be a little bit more intentional about things. You have to plan them. it does feel cringe sometimes because there's something natural about being around each other and just letting things flow. But truthfully, I can't possibly give you another answer. You just have to make your calendar your workspace, and make sure that all the different types of interactions that you want to promote and that feel like a good extension of your culture are there, and that you don't skip them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another mindset I'll add to that is just to kind of remember that if one person's remote, everyone's remote. And so if you are really being inclusive, is to say that, okay, well, if not everybody can always be in person, and that's, I understand. So you would stream something like a town hall to make sure everybody had the updates available. Or but especially at the smaller scale, like if you're running a team meeting or a team workshop, to like kind of make sure that the experiences and everything that they gain from onboarding to offboarding feels like, all right, well, we're going to really consider those as remote, as active participants in this culture, and not we hope that you like kind of the Amazon gift voucher that we shared with you because we weren't able to compensate some of the more deep cultural experiences for you. So, yeah.
I want to bring in a question from the audience now, and then later I have a question to you about controls.
Yeah.
But Ahmed asks, it's challenging for startups to build a company culture while growing fast. What's a piece of advice that they need to hear? I'm going to
Mm,
start off with an answer because I
sure.
think it's an important question, and then maybe you can add on. An important thing that you need to hear is that culture exists whether you manage it or not. There's no such thing as, oh, we'll worry about culture later, because actually what happens is the culture develops, and it develops without your intentionality. And it may or may not be the culture that you want. So, my first thing is there's no such thing as I'm going too fast to worry about my culture. Because inevitably, if you don't, what will happen is your culture will break. It'll be a barrier to strategy execution. And one day you'll wake up and you'll say, oh, we scaled so fast, we didn't worry about it. And now everybody hates each other. We, we all operate on fear. Everybody's burnt out. We haven't spoken about these things. And also, we haven't built in the right behaviors that allow our people to over deliver on our strategy. So I just wanted to start there. Like, this is not the only piece of advice is if you don't manage it, it's going to exist with or without you.
Yeah. Maybe I'll build on that. I think one thing that we've done, and also we've worked with different organizations at different scales to do, and at different points in their growth journey, is to remember that a lot of what we need to do to really design cultures, to make very implicit things explicit. And the most intentional leaders are really deliberate about that. To build a great organization is to also be very clear about the type of culture that you have. And not every culture, like look, no two cultures will look the same. Culture isn't also just about the pizza parties or the post-work hangouts. It's actually very much in what are the values? How do we engage with each other? Can we make our norms very explicit? Do you know what your meeting protocol should look like? Do in your organization, is 9 a.m. a 9 a.m. meeting, or is 9:05 a decent start time and we're all okay with those things? These are some of the norms. How do you communicate? How do you share feedback? How do you manage conflict? All of these things typically happen, and they will happen, as Marilyn is saying, to your organization if you're not deliberate about them. But if you take a minute and you say, well, this is the type of culture we want to build, and you're explicit about that, it is how you map the system. You start to kind of really design it and to say that, like, this is how we're going to operate. And you have examples of cultures that are hard cultures, right? I think the organization of he wrote Radical Candor, Marilyn, you'll know his name, it'll come off your tongue a lot faster. Their organizational culture was known for being tough. Like, it
You're
wasn't.
talking about Dalio. He didn't write it, but he endorsed it.
Yes, he endorsed this concept of, yes, Ray Dalio. I mean, it wasn't the type of culture where you're like, I can't wait to work in this organization, but it served its system very well, and it was a very successful organization. And to say that leaders shouldn't feel pressured to also come up with a culture that is cool or edgy or fun, or if that's not really what's going to serve your organization. I think there are great organizations that operate off of stricter protocols, very lots of clarity, and people enjoy coming to work with those types of environments. So really being
Mhm.
intentional about it and being explicit is a really good place to start.
And maybe a good tool that we can share, which is not our own, but that we really love and we use it a lot in workshops around culture design, is the Culture Canva that was developed by Gustavo Rezzetti. I hope I'm not murdering his name. And it's quite helpful because actually in addition to, as Tala said, like making the purpose and values explicit, it invites you to make things like how we make decisions, what are our norms, how do we run meetings, how do we give feedback to each other, which rituals are we going to prioritize, and those are really the elements of culture that people are most influenced by. So as a startup founder, if all you do is fill out this and stick to it, then we'll be very happy with you.
Yeah, wonderful. I'm going to bring us
Um,
back to our omnichannel org bingo, if that's okay.
and it's my turn to pick. Yeah, there you go. I've colored the cells gray that we're covering as we go. We still have 25 minutes. I'm not sure we'll finish all of it, but we'll get there. I think another question that I think really matters, Tala, is the question of control, right?
Absolutely.
Because culture and value is wonderful and cute, but how do we know that it is lived out? How do we measure it? And how do we make sure that it's integrated into how we reward people, how we incentivize them, also how we punish them? We always say like brilliant jerks are the biggest threat to culture. So people who perform well on the P&L but don't live up to values. So what do we put in place in order to protect ourselves from that?
Absolutely. I'll go ahead and remove the screen. I think what really stands out is actually the importance of taking culture and saying that it is a measurable piece of the employee experience. You can actually sit and look at the extent to which an employee in the organization is contributing to shaping the type of culture that its leadership has set out versus someone who's a detractor, someone who's, like you're saying, a brilliant jerk, really great at their job, but makes everybody's life super impossible and makes everybody dread coming to work. The way that we typically recommend organizations do that is to just really begin by being really explicit about your values and how you measure the extent to which individuals in your organization live out to those values. So, values are, the set of guiding principles that we as an organization have that help us say, how do we show up at work? So, lots of organizations are very clear about them. Typically, we put them on our website, we put them on the wall when you walk in, but then that's where it stays. What we recommend leaders do is design what we refer to as a values based competency model. Can you take that value and can you list the specific competencies or those specific behaviors, skills, or knowledge that an employee must possess and measure the extent to which employees at different levels live up to that? Let me walk you through a very specific example of what that looks like. If an organization places sustainability, which is the typical value a lot of them have, as their values, how do we then look at that from an individual contributor perspective to a leader perspective? We say, okay, in our organization, to be sustainable is to be resourceful and to not to do more with less. Another competency that emerges is to really think about the second order effects of your work and what you do. And the third might be, to reduce your physical footprint. So maybe you're tasked with working on less printables, something small like that. These are behaviors, knowledge, and skills, very specific examples that you can measure. And you can also then make sure that employees, just as they're delivering on their technical competencies, whether they're good at data analysis or if they're really their leadership competencies, look at their values-based competencies. And what that will really require in order for it to work is, first of all, leadership role modeling and being explicit about it from the outset. The second thing that would require is training, making sure that managers and those in a performance conversation know how to give feedback about it. So in our organization, it would be, a manager giving an individual contributor feedback on, do you know how to live up to the value of compassion? Like, are you truly going the extra mile? Not are you empathic, but do you take what you know about someone and will you do something about it? And to come up with examples of that in your performance conversation so that, you're ready to provide some proof. And really, that's how we, work with leaders to say, if you're really ready, honestly, to integrate these values into your organization, and if you're really ready to make culture a measurable part of the experience, then you're ready for it to be in your performance measurement. And then, therefore, everybody's held accountable at every level of the organization. And of course, you train everybody on how to give and receive feedback around that so that people then also understand that we're not only holding you accountable for this, but we're going to help you grow it. And we're going to design experiences for you to learn what it takes to be more sustainable. And that's more than just the annual water bottle drive. It's a little bit more than that, right? if it really depends organization to organization. But maybe I'll stop there and see also if you have another follow-up question on that, Marilyn, or if you want to add something from a project that you've worked on.
No, I mean, I think you gave some really beautiful example with the sustainability piece, and really how you take values that may seem kind of high level, maybe understood differently by different individuals, and turn them into explicit behavior, skills, or knowledge. I
Absolutely.
really love the second order effect example, because this isn't about like a very low level relationship between the skills and the value. It's really saying, when we say we want you to be sustainable, we want you to think about the next generation. Okay, how do I do that? Well, second order effect thinking,
Yeah.
right? That's the hard part. It's not just rating people on a value, it's
Yeah.
really translating it into specific behaviors. I think that's a really, really beautiful example.
Yeah, and by design, having it show up in the day-to-day work. Maybe I'll just share one mission also where we designed a scale-up's values, and we worked with the leadership team to be explicit about them. And then we operated in two countries, one of them being Saudi. And actually, when we took the values to the Saudi team, the feedback loops, the importance of that, they were like, we don't view compassion as that in Arabic. Actually, that's not the term that we would use. So we were like, great, thank you for this feedback. We went away, we worked with copywriters from their team and from their local context and rewrote the values, because what we wanted to make sure is everybody had a shared understanding of what it meant to live out this value of sustainability, not a preconceived notion of what that they think that word means to them. And so kind of going to one of the questions we had around like different cultures, and I think Sajan asks about cultural sensitivities. Actually, we
Mhm.
need to make sure that the values translate into every culture. This is really the case for regional or multinational organizations that operate in different environments. Like, you have to consider the local nuance in this, and you might change a word or two, you might not change much, but it is really important that you do what it takes to make sure that
Yeah.
it makes sense everywhere.
I do also think like that sensitivity matters, but also what matters is that in the end, organizational culture should quote unquote trump or local culture. So what we mean by that is, if you've done your job well, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter what culture people come from. They will, some people in some companies say we bleed blue, right? Or
Yeah.
whatever that expression is. What you really want to create is almost the sense of citizenship to a new nation. And that nation has its own cultural sensitivities. And in some ways, people choose the organizational culture over the culture that they carry with them. It doesn't mean we don't, express compassion, understanding, sensitivity to it. But it's just, if you've done your job well, this will be the common ground from where all cultures operate. And that's really what you're trying to achieve. I think
Yeah.
on the topic of controls and measurement, there's a good question from the audience as well, a really important one, which is, how can we talk about the impact of culture on the P&L? Because the ultimate measurement is
Um,
whether we impact the P&L. And I'll start with that, Tala, and maybe then you can take it from there. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the L, is the costs, okay? Because there we have a lot of directly demonstrable lines to draw. Okay, so
yep.
here's some data points for everybody. First of all, highly engaged teams, and culture plays a massive role in that, can deliver 23% higher profitability, 18% higher sales. So already there, we're looking at some of the profit elements. Less employee turnover by 31%, and increased productivity. So whether you're thinking about revenue, whether you're thinking about internal costs to operate, productivity, retention, there is a lot of data out there that proves the relationship between culture and P&L. And we even once created this fun little calculator where you would input your number of employees, your turnover rate, the average annual salary of your employees, and your yearly profit. And then based on that, we could tell you. So for example, if you're a company of 100 people and you have a 20% turnover rate, and average annual salary is whatever, $50,000, and you're making $8 million of profit. If you manage to fix all of these issues, which would lead to improving your attrition costs, increasing your productivities and your sales, you could stand to gain another 6 million if you add all of these things up. And so I think that, once more, I don't know why we ask this question about culture, but we don't ask it about process. No one will say, prove to me that fixing my process is going to improve my PNL. And yet everybody will say that about culture. But we have the data just equally to ask that. And I'm grateful this question was asked because then we can debunk this. As we said, structure, process, people, and culture, alignment to strategy, the way we interact with our environment, all of these, and of course, the way we control all of this, all of these contribute to a company being better at delivering on its strategy. We have the numbers if you need it, but next time I want someone to ask me, how does fixing my process fix my PNL? Then I'll be happy.
A challenge for all leaders out there listening. Wonderful. I'm going to bring back our omnichannel org. We have covered quite a bit of ground, actually. So it's great, all this audience engagement that we're getting. I think the next column we should probably take a look at, and the question that alludes to it is this people dimension. Of
For
course, culture
sure.
is really ultimately down to the individuals. And you said something about attrition, and I think that's so important, actually. The way in which we retain talent, the way in which we help grow talent, the way in which we promote from within, all that comes back to how we help grow our talent. And actually, some of the data points that remind us is actually there's a really great statistic that says 94% of employees would stay at a company if it invested in their career. And so people
Yep.
really are looking to work. They come to work to learn, to grow. And I think I'd love to kind of take the conversation there to speak about learning and the importance of creating learning cultures in organizations, and also, how leadership plays a role in helping others espouse the culture and really breathe life into it. And Nadine also asks the question to that effect. So maybe
Mm.
Marilyn, you want to start us off with a little bit about the role of leadership in role modeling culture. I think that would be a good place to start, and then we can talk about the rest.
Sure. I just want to resonate first with your 94% data point because actually, I always share this. I think it's a beautiful story. There are two Nobel Prize theories for why companies exist.
Mm.
One of them, which is called the knowledge-based view of the firm, I'm oversimplifying here, states that companies exist because individuals are willing to trade off freedom in exchange for knowledge and
Mm.
learning.
Beautiful.
And so the first thing I want to say is that I see it as a fundamental outcome of organizations that they develop people. It's why we say, oh, that company is a school, right?
Mm.
Like there are certain organizations, I don't know, the Unilevers and the McKinseys of this world, where it don't matter if they pay you badly, if you work 15 hours a day when you're 24, you will go there because once you leave there, you will have been transformed by the knowledge and the capabilities that they help you to develop. And I think
Beautiful.
that touches on two actually aspects of the omnichannel org. One is the institutional knowledge. So I
Mm.
think an organization's capacity to make explicit as much as it can its knowledge, to value its institutional knowledge and to proactively share that knowledge with the people that
Mm.
join the organization or interact with it is a key element of how we drive that culture. I mean, without wanting to sound arrogant, I think we as a team, for example, this year with the Cosmic Conference, truly saw how spending time sharing institutional knowledge and processes and best practices and methodologies and ways of working and standards and excellence and all of the stuff leads people, to helps them to become a better version of themselves. And they become delivery machines. I mean, I am still in awe of everything that done. Because if I told people that this 7-week conference was organized by 12 human beings who were doing this on top of their day job, no one would believe me.
Sure.
So I think on the one hand, that effort in codifying and sharing the knowledge, and also in how much time we spend sharing it. So linking back to developing people and training them and developing their knowledge. I don't think a single company of our size, and I'm willing to bet a lot of money on this, spends as much time in training and development as we do. Spend as much time talking about our culture,
Mm.
our values, the behaviors, the standard of excellence, the methodologies, the processes, the frameworks, the tools, the technology as we do. All right.
Yeah.
So I want to say that everybody shows up to work wanting to do their best. Everybody can understand what the value of compassion is, but not everybody's equipped to deliver feedback in a compassionate manner because we're just not born with it.
No.
And so I think that anyone who says that you just hire the right people and you shouldn't have to train them because if you got a good cultural fit, then they already know, that is a load of bullcrap. Like, I really don't believe that for a second. I've heard it before. So, what do I want to say? I want to say that um, even for leaders, by the way, just because you're a good leader doesn't mean you know all these behaviors. I'm a self proclaimed task oriented person. I have spent my entire career, and I'm a good person. I try to be a good leader. I've spent my entire career trying to be better on the people side. I have to put in a lot of crutches for that. It doesn't come naturally for me, and I get it wrong sometimes. And so, what matters though is that whatever culture you want to have. So, for example, in our case, we have excellence, compassion, community, curiosity, creativity, and I'm missing one. You'll tell me which one. Huh?
Discipline.
Thank you.
Discipline.
And of course, I forgot discipline. So what I mean to say is that actually we have a really big balance of task
Yeah.
and people-oriented values now that I think about it this way. But as a leader, if I don't show up in those ways, like I could do discipline and excellence in my sleep, but I'm not always naturally equipped to be compassionate 100% of the time, 100% in the way that I want to be. I had to learn this. I had to be given feedback. I had to develop. I have a whole suite of people helping me do that. I have a coach, I have mentors, I have peers. We talk about it all the time. So even I mean, I think I try and do a decent job of being a good leader that role models these things, but I have a whole team of people helping me because I know that if I don't, then all these things that I say matter will just dissipate.
Yes.
So we know that managers and leaders account for 70% of people's engagement scores. We know that them role modeling the right culture is 100% of whether people will do it or not, because if people see that their leaders don't really believe in this stuff, think it's, nice, cute illusions and dreams, they themselves will not put in the effort. And something that, we learned last week, we were talking about psychological safety with Sander Hoken, and he said, all the behaviors that lead to psychological safety are not innate to humans.
Mm,
They're not natural to us. And so we
mm.
need all the help we can get. Upskilling, on the job, feedback, coaching, and so on and so forth, so we can be the best version of ourselves. As you can see, this is a topic that is very close to my heart. What's your perspective, Tala?
It's great. It's great. I asked. I think absolutely. We've also seen the importance, like leaders who walk the talk, right? If we say we are going to value inclusion in our organization and we shoot down every idea in a meeting, or if we say that we are an organization, like active listening happens to be one of the values, and we're just yelling all over the place. There are these examples that we need to kind of hold back our triggers and say, are we role modeling the right behaviors? Hard as it might be for some of us, right? Like hard as it might be to say that, like, but you don't understand, in this moment they drove me mad. It's like, I understand, and actually it's exactly the perfect learning moment to hold back and to kind of share. I also want to talk about creating the different ways that you can bring culture to life through, you can make this learning experience shared. What do I mean by that? If we want to focus on our values, if you want to spend a day dedicated to learning them, run a grow day. Help people, build the skill sets. We love this ritual. It's a great way to send the organization off and dedicate some time to truly um, learning about a topic, be it your values, be it artificial intelligence, be it whatever you might be. But there are shared moments when the organization can come together and, focus on the elements of your culture that bring it to life. I've seen examples of major organizations running an Ask Me Anything with their CEO around the values. A great way to get the top of the organization to be sharing a lot about what this looks like in the day-to-day. I've seen campaigns, they do work, we critique them at the beginning of this session, but there are great storytelling moments where you can kind of capture stories of different people from across the org, frontline workers to, leaders, to what's happening in the boardroom about the values in action. These are small things that you can do to make this knowledge available and explicit and to go on this learning journey together so that nobody ever feels like they have to do it alone. And we think that's super important, especially if you are going to bring back those incentives and guardrails and bring in something like a values-based competency model, because if you're going to do something like that, you really need to create those experiences for employees and for leaders to live out those values and learn what it means to live out those values. Which is again why the competency model really helps, because it takes a value and it breaks it down into the knowledge, the skills, and the behaviors that you expect. And those three things can really then say, okay, I can categorize this as that, and skill through these workshops, knowledge through these sessions, and behaviors through these storytelling. Great way to think about it. So I just think it's really important for it to feel like a lived experience, and for it to feel like we can learn about these things.
Yeah.
You might not be inherently born with the value of sustainability, but you can definitely build those skills, right? So definitely that.
Absolutely. Now, of course, that's not to say that you shouldn't be also recruiting people that match your culture.
Absolutely.
That just
Yeah.
saves everybody a bit of trouble, you know. And I think, Tala, you can show the next slide on this deck, because the idea there as well is to say that you really want to make sure that you integrate those guardrails and those incentives all along the way, and you integrate your culture every step of the way. So what we say as well is that it's not just about worrying about these touch points, it's about making sure that all of these elements are part of the process every step of the way. From your employer brand, I mean, we're a bit quirky in our employer brand. We make jokes. We always
Mhm.
say if a client or an employee takes themselves too seriously, we are not the place for them to work, you know, or to collaborate with. So I think from our recruitment process, how we sound, our employer branding, how we prepare people to onboard them are very extensive, but also very like fun and beautiful and whimsical onboarding experience. All the way to, and that is the crux of culture, is work, right? So
Yeah.
we by the way, we have done a lot of culture activations ourselves. We're not saying that you shouldn't do campaigns or team building exercises. Far from it. We're just saying that if culture stays in the realm of that, then it'll always be seen as a cute little add-on. Culture should exist in everything that we do, in how we compensate people, how we manage their performance, how we reward them. Yes, the communication, our processes are also a great representation of culture. I can't say, hey, gang, I really want you to have a standard of excellence even when I'm not in the room, and then have to be in every room to validate everything. We talked about learning and development. Even when people leave, we have a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful ritual when someone leaves the company, which is called a graduation ceremony. Because even when someone leaves, we want to celebrate them. We want to celebrate their contributions. We want to mark the contribution that they've given to a company. I'm not ashamed to say we have about 27 people there, between interns, but also employees who just moved on. There's nothing wrong about that. Why should we have that experience break our culture? Quite the contrary. So the message that I think we really also want to send is that you want to integrate it in every step of the way, and you want to make sure that it's lived out. And you know what's funny to me is that, for example, as parents, we understand this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or as members of a family or community. So, you know, if we don't want our kids to be spoiled brats, we make sure that they take their plate to the kitchen and that no one is serving them, even if there's help at home. I'm taking a stupid example. Or that they don't delegate this task to their grandmother. We are there in the small little tasks of the daily. Like for me, I want my daughter to be a positive person. Every time she turns into a drama queen, I call her out. I'm like, this is not how we deal with these things. Obviously, if she's crying for a good reason, I'm all in. But if she's just being a spoiled brat, I'm like, no, I need this experience to be positive. I need you to smile. So now, even in the morning when she comes to wakes me up, she's like, hi, mama, I'm smiling. It's a new day. I can assure you that's not how she behaved before. So intuitively, we understand that if you want to shape someone's behavior, you have to have high levels of consistency. We have to bring that into our organizations.
Beautiful. I think I just like to add one thing to this, which is to say that you can find measurable evidence if your culture is serving you across each element of this touch point. And measuring culture isn't one of those very philosophical things, can actually be very practical. The feedback loops and systems thinking is a great tool to kind of just remember that you can collect feedback at every point of the journey. And, with onboarding, it's like, did you think that the hiring process reflected the type of organization that we work for? Great. Did you feel like onboarding set you up? Did you feel like you met enough people? Did you collect this feedback along the way? All of these great, pieces of information help you reinforce your culture and design, nudge the system, fix it in different ways to do that. If you just look at Glassdoor ratings, I know a lot of organizations look at it to say, like, as people leave, are they saying something positive about the working experience. Of course, you will always have people who will, moan around the things that they didn't like. But I think it's really important to say that you can measure culture all along the way. There are great scales, there's great tools, even just, pulse
including our
surveys.
own.
Including our own, absolutely. And one thing I just want to say is, and Marilyn alluded to this earlier, is if we're going to measure this data as leaders, we must be ready to do something about it. We cannot simply collect data and look at a sea of red and for employees to tell us that the working environment is, absolutely like non-conducive to delivering value and then say, well, at least we pay them well and just kind of move on from that. Like, so with this measurement and with this holistic look at the employee experiences, can we as leaders identify the touch points that we will work on to really make sure that our culture shines through? And just as Marilyn mentioned, it really kind of super importantly is the work. Really, really
Yeah,
is important.
absolutely. I want to end us on a quote or two here. The first is from Amy Edmondson, which is that if the only thing you have to offer people is money, you better be prepared to have a lot of it. So that's number one.
No.
And last week we were with one of the biggest regional groups, learning from them. And they shared how many people last year that they were aware of as HR had refused an external job offer specifically off of the back of their culture. So
Yeah.
I want to say, like, there's a lot of beautiful stories out there. So that's the first quote. And another one is one that we often use as well, which is that anybody can copy your business model, but your culture is impossible to copy. And therefore, as a business owner, I think it is one of the fundamental sources of competitive advantage because it's not easy to replicate. And I think that's kind of the thought that I want to leave everybody with around how culture operates in an organization and how it enables it to deliver and to compete.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. Wonderful. It's at the hour. Can you believe it?
Yeah, we almost covered everything, I have to tell
We
you. I'm
did.
very proud of us.
We did. And also, I think we have some great audience questions. We'll go back and definitely answer them. I know, Sajjan, your question around diversity and and creating an inclusive work environment in multicultural organizations. Happy to share a few frameworks there that we like. So we'll jump back in. And yeah, I believe with that, Marilyn, we'll just give everybody a big thank you for joining us today.
Yes, a huge thank you for joining us, for the fun questions. I hope you enjoyed our format. The Omnichannel Bingo is something that we play a lot as consultants when we're working on new projects. But now you're one of us, so you know how it works. Of course, the session's available here on this LinkedIn link if you want to share it with anyone who you think might find it interesting. We'll also release it as a YouTube as well as a podcast episode later today. This is our before last webinar.
The penultimate webinar.
Tomorrow we have our final event of the conference, which is, as always, the much anticipated and tradition of closing the conference with Prof. José Santos, who's a personal mentor and affiliate professor of practice and global management at INSEAD. And as always, we like to close every conference with a bit of intellectual honesty, looking at the concept that we explore, whatever that may be. And so this year it'll be systems thinking, and really questioning. We always question the title of the conference at the end of it, so we can see if we pick the right one. So tomorrow we'll be exploring whether or not the system really is the strategy. See you tomorrow.